Welcome back to the Man Cave. Following the video I did a few days ago in which I looked at Shabana Mahmood, Labour Home Secretary's latest proposals for immigration and asylum, I thought I'd spend a little bit of time today to look at what all of the political parties are proposing along the same lines on the same policy, just to give people perhaps a better idea and more in-depth idea of what it is that they have in common and actually who's talking about doing something different. Let's start with the real extremists, and the real extremists are the Green Party. The Green Party's gained a bit of traction recently, which has come as a bit of a shock and a surprise to many, and that includes me, I have to say. When you look at the Green Party's policies, really what they offer is unapplied, unadulterated Marxism. And what they're proposing in their migration and asylum policy really typifies all that they stand for. And fundamentally, that comes down to something really simple, that they don't believe in national borders, and they believe that anybody should have a right to come to this country just if they want to do so, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what their intentions are, and how they're likely to behave when they get here. They have no interest in the rights and needs of British people, the British population. They don't believe in borders at all, and they don't fundamentally believe in national sovereignty. So if you want to have an open borders policy and to have absolutely no control whatsoever over who comes to this country, then the Green Party are your party. And I have to be honest, I struggle to understand why anybody might think that that's a good idea. Shockingly though, what's not far behind that is the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats share a policy which is pretty much almost identically aligned to what the Labour Party policy was before Shabana Mahmood made her declaration last week. The Liberal Democrats believe in making it easier. They fundamentally like to think of everybody as being terribly nice, of anybody who wants to come here as somehow being an asset to the country. They want to make it easier for people to come here. They want to reduce the number of checks and balances. They want to make it legal for people to work here 3 months after arriving, even if they are illegal immigrants and have no right to get here. And they also want to, like the Labour Party is proposing, to open up more so-called safe routes to this country so that people can be streamlined to come here in ever greater numbers. That's your Liberal Democrat policy. The Labour Party, as we discussed last week, are talking tough. They're talking tough, whilst on the other hand offering something which is considerably simpler for asylum seekers than what has gone before. So they're trying to mollify the British public. They're trying to make you feel that perhaps they're on your side, that they understand the concerns of British people, while simultaneously instigating a policy of opening up more routes, streamlining the process and making it easier for people to get here, fundamentally by rebranding them so that nobody is an illegal immigrant anymore. Everybody is an asylum seeker and everybody has a right to come to this country. The Conservative Party is also talking tough. The Conservative Party is recognising for the first time the need to leave the ECHR and the fact that as long as we're signatories to the ECHR, fundamentally, whatever we decide within our own country is pretty much redundant. It doesn't make any difference because everything that we decide will be overruled by a foreign court. In talking tough, of course, the Conservative Party is fatally compromised by its own record in government. And in 14 years, we saw the Boris wave, we saw what went before that, we saw previous prime ministers in David Cameron and Theresa May softening the process so that finally the gates could be opened and ever greater numbers of immigrants could come here. And that's what we've subsequently found, that the Conservative Party would talk tough, but the ultimate product of that, what we ultimately got from that, as we all know now, was a huge wave of extra immigration. The greatest thing, of course, that I think compromises the Conservative Party policy is what happened with the Afghan immigrants and the way that the Conservative Party behaved over all of that. Fundamentally, they made a terrible error. They compromised national security, and rather than own up to that, they chucked billions of pounds at the problem. They hushed it all up to make sure that British people never understood the implications of it, and then proceeded to allow thousands and thousands of Afghan people into this country, pretending actually that it wasn't happening. There was no warning to the British people of this. Anybody who realised what was going on and tried to draw concern to it was dismissed and smeared as a racist. It cost the taxpayer a huge sum of money, and they even lied to the Treasury in a desperate effort to cover it up. They didn't admit to the billions of pounds that it was costing. More than anything else, I think that was what led to me finally concluding that the Conservative Party was dead, that there was no way back from that for a party that calls itself Conservative to behave in such a way, with complete disregard for the truth, for the British people, for our security, and to spend that amount of taxpayers' money on covering up a fundamental error rather than just owning up to it, facing it and dealing with it, really, I think, is inexcusable. It's not something that I can ever imagine myself coming to terms with, and feeling that once again the Conservative Party has become trustworthy. So for all of their tough talk and rhetoric, I don't think you can trust the Conservative Party on immigration and asylum. I think that they have shown us that they will say what we want to hear, and that when push comes to shove, to suit their own needs, they may well then just go off and do something completely different. That brings us to Reform UK. And Reform UK, of course, are talking tough, and have been talking tough for some time. Some time, that is, until Nigel Farage turned up again, and 6 weeks before the general election took control and put Zia Youssef in place, and then set about taking what was a well-formed and very popular policy on immigration and asylum that really genuinely did reflect the needs and concerns of the British people. And from that time on, Farage has flip-flopped. Why has he done that? It's an interesting question, and I think there's two main reasons for that. First of all, it's his obsession with the centre. Nigel Farage thinks that, and he has said this, that the British people who have what he might think to be right-wing pretensions, who are concerned about our security, our national identity, our culture, about crime, he thinks that us lot, we the British people, are distasteful. He's moving towards the centre ground because Nigel Farage doesn't represent the British people in truth. Nigel Farage represents Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage sees himself as a presidential figure, and in his ultimate sanctimonious manner considers that nobody is equipped to share a stage with him, offer any kind of challenge to him, question him in any way. We should all just sit there, shut up, listen to what he tells us, recognise his innate superiority and deliver him to his rightful place in 10 Downing Street. Nigel Farage has calculated that he needs to win votes from the centre in order to deliver himself into that position. And that's why his policies continually flip-flop. On the one hand, he's tried not to completely wash his hands of all the people behind Reform UK who have desperately set themselves behind it in the hope that it might be the salvation of this country. He hasn't wanted to entirely chuck the baby out with the bathwater. But anybody who's questioned him, of course, has gone. That doesn't just include people like Ben Habib or Rupert Lowe or James McMurdoch or even me. There are hundreds, thousands of those up and down the country. The asylum and immigration policies of Reform UK are one of the main battlegrounds for this, because everybody who's a natural reform supporter, who naturally is concerned about our security, about our culture, about crime, about the way that this country's face is changing, is going to feel that this is a battle that has to be fought and has to be won. Nigel Farage, in his desperate quest for votes at any cost, he wants the votes of people who up until now have voted Conservative, even Liberal Democrat increasingly, and for the Labour Party. And so those views are increasingly distasteful to him. To make those views public puts him in a position, perhaps, of not attracting the votes that he feels he has to attract in order to deliver himself into 10 Downing Street. And perhaps that's why Nigel Farage has then talked of it being inevitable, actually, that this country will at some point become Islamic, and has said that it's literally impossible to return illegal immigrants. That's the truth about reform under Nigel Farage, that you may well have thought that Farage and Reform are your saviours. You may well have picked up those bits of rhetoric which reflect your own fears, concerns and hopes for the future. But in truth, he'll say whatever he wants to say to whoever is listening at that particular time in order to be able to buy their particular vote. Of course, there's a second level to this as well, and that's the funding of Reform UK. And if you look at the average person who supports Reform UK, there are a couple of things which they're going to consider to be anathema. One of them is the influence of Islam, the influence of political Islam. And if you have a look at who is funding Reform UK now, it's very interesting. And I'm going to talk about this at greater length in a future video, to see that some of the people who are giving largest amounts of money are some of the people that your average Reform voter would consider anathema, would consider to be people that they don't want to be involved in funding the party and contributing with influence to its future and to the future of the country. This brings us to a final place then, and that final place is the party that I have now joined, and that party is Advance. Advance believes something completely different. This is a very fundamental plank of what Advance is. Advance believes that the security and safety of the British people is paramount, that borders must exist, must be properly policed, and that people who are illegal migrants should not be permitted to enter this country. If any of them should be able to get through, they should be securely detained and kept away from the British population so that they're not able to freely mix as they are now, work in the black market and get involved in things undetected, which the state is not able to understand, see or control. Reform, to its credit, still says that it believes that we must leave the ECHR. It still understands what the Conservative Party has struggled to understand, in that as long as you're remaining associated with the ECHR, it fundamentally doesn't matter what you determine in Parliament, because it will be overridden by a foreign court. Reform understands that, but what Reform thinks the solution to that is to put together a British Bill of Rights to replace the ECHR. What Advance understands is that actually that's completely unnecessary. It's totally redundant. There's a simple reason for that. And that simple reason is that we have a constitution in this country. And that constitution emanates from the Magna Carta, all the way back in the time of King John. And what the Magna Carta outlined was a fundamental Bill of Rights for the British people. A constitution that was never written down in one place, but was updated continually throughout our history and served the British people extremely well until the advent of Tony Blair. Tony Blair, of course, deliberately vandalised all of that. He threw it all out, he dismantled it, and he replaced it with an alignment with the EU. And what the EU was aligned with was the ECHR. And that's why that was done. Blair had to get rid of our birthright, our constitution, the Magna Carta, in order to be able to hand the control that he wanted to hand to the European Union. There's actually a fundamental part of the Magna Carta that states that no man can repeal it, and that in doing so, attempting to do so, is an act of treason. Of course, Blair also repealed the Treason Act. The fact of the matter is that according to the Magna Carta, according to our fundamental rights, Blair was guilty of treason. And every single Prime Minister who has followed Blair, who's gone along with what he laid out, with the legislation he laid down, has also been fundamentally guilty of treason. Advance recognises this. Advance understands that. Advance knows that we can leave the ECHR. We can relinquish the control of that higher court. We can finally do what the British people stated they wanted to do in our biggest ever democratic exercise in the referendum. And we can leave all external control behind. And we can go back to what served us so well, what became the basis of law, not just for this country, but for countries all over the world, and that includes America. And that's to go back to our Constitution, to the Magna Carta, to what came before. So let's sum this up then. There's only one party out there which is going to offer the proper solution to the problems that we face, and that party is Advance. It is not Reform. Reform will continue with the treason. Reform is an authoritarian party that will replace authoritarian legislation with its own authoritarian legislation, all laid down to the control of one man, a man who sees himself as a presidential figure and not a prime minister at all. In the following video, I'm going to introduce you to an old friend of mine, a constitutional expert who's somebody who I've known for many years, who has spent years and years studying the Magna Carta, studying our Constitution, and who really understands treason and the rights of the British people, how it's served us so well over all of these centuries, how it's become the bedrock of our legal sector and has driven the rise of democracy and rights all over the world. So I'm going to introduce you to Colin Sevier later on. Colin is extremely knowledgeable, and I'm quite sure that that in the interview that I do with Colin later on, you'll learn a few things and you'll go away from it understanding that putting together a Bill of Rights is no more a solution to what we have faced than leaving the Constitution in the first place and putting ever more behind the ECHR and the European Union. So there we have it. That's an overview of where we stand with all of the political parties in this country on migration and returns of illegals. I look forward to seeing you later and introducing you to Colin Sevier, in which we can talk more about the needs and the desperate requirement for this future of this country of returning to the British Constitution, the Magna Carta, and remembering that there is only one party that exists that's committed to do that, and that party is Advance UK. See you later.